Welcome to this webinar. This is the tendering procedures strategy sessions with a Q&A, and we're going to focus on changes to procedural types. So welcome along, everyone. Hopefully we can add some value and have a little bit of fun along the way on this Wednesday lunchtime. Just me for this afternoon, folks. So hopefully we can carry on and add some value across the next. We'll aim to go somewhere between sort of 35 and 45 minutes. So I know your time is important, and we'll try and not put too much fluff and get some good value in across the session. We do have a question and answer function that's available within, so you can punch in questions within the system as well. So please feel free to do that, and what we'll try and do is to gather up some responses as we go through it and see if there's some appropriate points to reference them and to have a look and see what's what. Okay, so my name's Andrew Watson. I should say I'm the bid training consultancy manager here at Proactus. So I'm doing kind of living all things bids, really. My role is to support our team with our clients to make them as successful as possible anytime they embark on trying to secure a public sector or sometimes private sector contract through a formal proposal process, through a tender process. So we're kind of, myself and the team are kind of living and breathing this all day long. So hopefully we'll be in a good position to try and provide some value to you guys. Obviously it's mainly a supply focused webinar this afternoon. Okay, so just checking if there's any questions or anything like that. Do submit them, do keep them in. It should let you do it just as we're going along, and then we'll stop and get it, or you can punch them in the chat as well. One of the things I should say is we always get asked about access to the webinar recording afterwards. So what we'll do is we send out a link where you can re-watch the recording in your own time afterwards. Obviously spin through, and if there's any section, some of this stuff today is a little bit dense. That's not me, that's the stuff. Okay, thank you for the jokes. And you can kind of pause that at your own leisure and kind of go through and skip, sort of spin back through any points you think might be particularly relevant. Okay. So we're living in this new world, right, where we've gone live with the Procurement Act. There's some fundamental changes to the way in which procurements are being run, the options that are available to public sector contracting authorities. So what does it look like? What are we going to cover, and how is this going to impact on us as eager suppliers looking for our piece of the pie, our piece of the cake as we're going on? How is it going to work? Okay, so in terms of what we're going to cover across today, a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a scene setting. I would say at this point we've done we've done at least two webinars. We've done three webinars, but the last two webinars focused around some of the details on the Procurement Act. So if you want to dive a little bit more into the terminology around them, you can go back and rewatch both our April and our March webinars, which were focused on the Procurement Act, along with this one. And on the Knowledge Hub pages of the Tenders Direct website, we also have some really fantastic written resources there specifically about the impacts of the Procurement Act as well. So do go and have a look through that stuff. The Knowledge Hub on Tenders Direct as well, you can have a look at some great resources that we've got there too. Okay, so introduction, bit of a scene setting. We're going to understand, like, what are authorities doing? What are they faced with? Why are they doing what they're doing? We're going to look at what the pros and the cons are of the various tendering procedures, bits and pieces that they're able to use. What are those pros and cons? We're going to look at it through the lens of a supplier. So we're going to say, okay, well, we're working within this context, within this new framework where we've got the competitive flexible procedures, etc., all these different ways in which authorities can structure their procurement. How do we recognize and how do we respond to those? How do we exploit the opportunities that exist against those? Okay. What we'll also do is we will touch a little bit on some hot topics and some frequently asked questions, most of the same things. So when we've had some of that stuff come in, so for example, the registration questions, there were lots of themes of things that kind of emerged a good few times. So for those things, let's try and knock off some of those things. And if we've got time and people have still got stamina, we can look to try and take some live questions as well. See if I can't get myself a bit stumped with some highly technical questions, which is always good fun when that happens, because it does. I'm joking. Well, I'm not. It depends on the question. You could ask me some obscure line from the new Procurement Act quoting the actual legislation. I probably wouldn't know off the top of my head what it is. Anyway, let's see how we get on. So, in terms of an introduction, what are we looking to understand? We've talked about this in the previous webinars, but let's have a little bit of a think about what is actually happening. Okay, so what are authorities faced with? They've got some guidance, they've got some restrictions, they've got some obligations. We need to understand a little bit about this system that's in place to then understand a little bit about what decisions they're making and why. What's their sort of decision-making framework, if you like? What considerations they've got to have to then say, okay, well, this is why they're making these decisions to arrive at these particular processes or these particular approaches, to then understand, well, if they've gone through that and arrived at this, these are the sort of things that we need to be considering as potentially as suppliers to give ourselves the best chance. So when we're talking just now about the authorities, the buying authorities, contracting authorities, the decisions or the considerations they've got to take into account, we need to think about this and carry this all the way through our thinking when we get to the end and we start thinking about how should we be responding. Okay. So some of the text there we're talking about. The buyers have a new flexibility to design elements of procedures, but the idea is that they're always doing it to obtain the most beneficial outcome. And while they're doing it, they are still bound to deliver against the overarching principles, which are the ones that underpin the Procurement Act. These are the ones that we've got on the screen here, okay? So proportionality, okay? So the procurement approach should be proportional to the cost, to the contract value. It should always be focused on delivering value for money, on maximising the wider public benefit, on maximising transparency, allowing them to act with integrity, to treat bidders equally, and to reduce or remove barriers for entry into the process from SME, small and medium-sized enterprises. Okay. We talked about that last point around about SME involvement in the process. We talked about that a little bit more extensively in the past webinars, but they are duty bound to demonstrate that they have considered whether or not it's possible to remove barriers for SME participation within procurement exercises. And they may well be asked to go, well, can you explain to me what consideration you did give to the removal of barriers to establish whether or not it was suitable or reasonable to do. Okay, so those are the overarching principles that they've got to take into account. Okay, so just thinking about it, why do authorities choose a given procedure? And again, the stuff we're going through, we're going to build on and build on so we get to have a really good fundamental understanding to know what we can then do. That's what we're trying to do across the course of this webinar. Why do they choose a given procedure? So with the overarching principles that we talked about in the previous slide, they'll choose a given procedure. First and foremost, important point to note, the choice of a procedure, and when we're talking about choice of a procedure, we're talking about either running it as an open procedure or as a competitive flexible procedure and all of the different options that are entailed within that. The choice to do that only happens for above threshold procurements. Okay, so above threshold is just under £140,000 total contract value for central government bodies and just under £215,000 for subcentral, non-central government bodies for total contract values. And there are higher limits for utilities, defence and works contracts. Okay, So if it's below the relevant threshold, and I've said this in every single webinar that we do, the contracting authority will know whether or not a given procurement exercise is above or below threshold, and therefore what the options available to them are. By number, by count, the vast majority of opportunities are below threshold. So therefore they're open procedures, and the majority of above threshold ones are also open procedures. So it's by far the most common one, but what we're talking about really in this is what do you do in that scenario? What do you do if you find yourself faced with a more sort of complex procedure in front of you? Okay, but the first thing is they only apply in terms of the option if it's above threshold. The authority should give design due consideration and make sure it's appropriate to meet the procurement objectives. So I'll talk about this a lot, but I've talked about this, and whenever we do webinars, we talk about we need to start trying to think strategically when we're doing submissions. Okay, so in terms of what does our bid strategy look like, in terms of what opportunities are we going to pursue? How are we going to pursue them? What are we going to emphasize across the responses? So these different layers of strategy that we have within our sphere of bid activity. Okay. Likewise, or on the flip side, if you like, authorities are supposed to be strategic about what the procurement objectives they're looking to achieve are, and therefore the design should be a design that best supports the achievement of those procurement objectives. Okay. When I'm putting commas up, it's obviously because I'm quoting directly from a government source. So in terms of the choice of a procedure, there are no limits on the number of stages or supplementary processes that can be included in this catch-all term, competitive flexible procedure. In the last webinar we showed one where it was relatively straightforward, but it was a competitive flexible procedure, had a presentation stage built into it. And we showed another example from an MOD tender, which had, I think it was about 20 stages built into it. So lots of complexity. So there's no limit. I've talked about already, they have a duty to ensure the procedure is proportionate, having regard to the nature, complexity, and cost of the contract. Overly complicated procedures can limit competition and fail to achieve best value. So what we should be thinking about, what the authority should be thinking about, is they should be having just the amount of complexity that's needed to achieve their best outcomes. They shouldn't be building any complexity, any complications in terms of stages, anything like that. They shouldn't be building any of that in that they can't really make a good case for saying, I'm building this extra stage in because the value of the procurement will likely be higher to offset the addition of the complication. Okay, so it should, in a very simple way, it should only be as complicated as it needs to be. Okay. There are certain obligations that buyers must adhere to. So even when they're working in this above threshold world and they choose to have a competitive flexible procedure, they can't just, it's not a free pass to do absolutely everything. There are still obligations that they must meet in terms of some of the things we've talked about, and in terms of things like timescales. So as a standard, the window for suppliers to respond within for a tender is a minimum of 25 days. You can't, some occasions you can have a pre-notice and then you can reduce it down to 10 days, but you can't just randomly choose a different number of days that's below that. You can't just go, for mine, I'm just going to give suppliers 6 days to respond. No, they're not allowed to do that. It's the timescales, the minimum timescales are mandated, and so there is a framework that they're still working within, even within the flexibility that the competitive flexible procedure allows. And buyers, just to re-emphasize the point, they should be going through and planning out end to end what their process is going to look like and what the implications of that process are, that design are, to know, okay, well, can I consider what alternatives I could potentially use to therefore arrive and to be confident that I'm working at the best. I've arrived at the best solution. The whole concept around opportunity cost, I've picked this course of action, therefore I need to be comfortable that that is the best course of action instead of any of the other potential courses of action that I've chosen. Okay. Just going to check on questions very quickly. We do have, I've got one person saying that they're not able to hear, which I'm hopeful is not me. I think I would have had more comments given the number of people on. I would have had more comments if there were any particular issues with hearing. But I'll look out for any more comments. I would just obviously try and exit and come in again if anyone else is having that issue. I don't know if there's much else I can do apart from looking at the settings on your computer, but hopefully I am loud and clear for all of those suffering through it. There's a couple other questions I'll look to pick up on a little bit later. Yeah, okay. So lots of people are saying they can hear. Not sure if that's a blessing or not, but yeah, it does seem to be working for others. Thank you for that confirmation. I'm sorry about the issue, but yeah, try and look at the settings, or if not, jump in, jump out, jump back in. And obviously any gaps you'll be able to pick up on the recording as well. So again, just to re-emphasize in terms of the framework and the obligations and the guidance that contracting authorities are being given. These are all the things from the government, the central government commercial function. The requirements and the needed outcomes should drive the design. So let's think about from a buyer's point of view, we're thinking about what are the outcomes we want this procurement to achieve? What are the requirements that are needed to arrive at those outcomes? And what design for the process, what design is going to best drive that through? Okay, so that's what they should be thinking about. So it's a bit of a burden in terms of like, really, they've got to be on it. They've got to be, have some experience, have some skills, and do the right things in terms of this process. We talked a lot about proportionate, but there it is again, proportionate, and it should encourage the suppliers to participate. So we shouldn't have undue barriers to entry, especially for SMEs. Okay, so we shouldn't see this explosion of massively complex procurement processes. That's not what we're talking about. Be mindful of the associated costs and resources on both the contracting authority and the supplier. So again, a different way of saying it shouldn't be overly complex. It shouldn't be resource intensive to both run the process and to respond to it. Okay, and really nice to see preliminary market engagement is recommended to set the context of the procurement, the objectives, and explain how the process is intended to run to obtain feedback from suppliers. So a real emphasis on preliminary market engagement. So if you do see things, I'll talk a little bit about the different notice types later on in the webinar, but if you do see things then that are preliminary, I see people kind of early stages around bidding, and they'll say things, oh, what, that's not actually a notice that I can bid against, I just won't bother with it. It's not very strategic an approach. If we see opportunities to get engaged, even if it's things we think maybe potentially we wouldn't bid for that, but still do the engagement piece, get that market research, get that understanding of what's going on and what potentially they're looking for. Is it going to help us to shape our solution designs into the future? Consider allowing for more innovative solutions to be proposed. So this does then lend itself to saying, well, potentially we want to operate a little bit more multi-stage, a little bit more complex tender procedures, tender approaches, so that we can build in the opportunity for innovation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. We're talking about the opportunities that it poses. And they're saying, make use of the commercial skills that exist within the contracting authority. So if they have skills and they can they're comfortable doing things about having those negotiations, having that dialogue, having that discussions with suppliers, structuring things to make comfortable that they are going to get the best outcomes, then don't shy away from doing that. They're saying that contracting authorities should be able to do that type of thing. Okay, hopefully all good so far, guys. It's that's a little bit of the scene setting piece, and hopefully you understand why that's important, because we need to get into the mindset of all the way through this process. We need to be thinking about, okay, the buyer has chosen this approach. It's got this many stages, it's this complicated, or no, it's this simple. We need to be thinking as part of our strategy for what might be appropriate. What approach have they taken? Do we understand why they've taken that approach? And what clues does that give us about what sort of solution they're looking for? What sort of themes are going to resonate with them in terms of this particular procurement? So it's not for nothing. We need to be aware, conscious, looking for these details. It's this type of strategic thinking. It's this type of next level thinking that in the same as I've talked about in other things, when we're actually preparing our responses, this stuff feeds into what actually our responses will look like. And that stuff is the thing that's going to separate us potentially from, from good bids or okay bids into the great bids, into great responses. Okay, so it's important that we do it. Okay, so let's talk about some pros and cons of the two kind of broad categories that we have in terms of procedures. Okay. Talked about open procedures, and they're the default, so they're only suitable, or sorry, you're only able to use if you've got a below threshold opportunity, then you will be using, as authority will be using an open procedure. So that's where you're going to see what are other, apart from being the only thing that they can use for those low value ones, what are the other pros of them running an open procedure? They're easy. They're relatively easy to run. You don't have this big design burden or this big sort of solution design burden for your procurement process. You don't have to do that. So they're relatively straightforward and easy to run. They're easy to understand in terms of from the buyer side, and they're also easy to understand in terms of supplier side. Just for clarity, open procedure is one where so one stage, and as a supplier, you submit your selection stage information, so the information about your organization's current capability and previous experience, and that is evaluated to see if you're a good fit. And then you also submit your solution, your tender stage response, so all the stuff around how you will deliver the work that they're looking to procure. So you submit all that information in one go, and then they evaluate it at the same time. They actually evaluate the selection stage first, and it's only if you pass that and then go on and evaluate your tender stage for your response. But you submit everything in one go. Okay. Anything else is different from an open procedure. So anything where it's multi-stage, we can think of anything where it's multi-staged as being, will fall under this catch-all term of competitive flexible procedure. Okay. They're fast because you just got one stage, boom, you're done. Okay, relatively. And in terms of doing that, managing it, it means it's easy to manage for simple procurement. So not a lot of complexity. You could have maybe potentially like a broader pool, or the less experienced people in terms of within the procurement team within an organization would probably start off, be easier for them to run that type of procedure versus a more complex one, making sure that they do it in a compliant way. In terms of what are the downsides for everyone in terms of open procedures, well, there's less scope for design, and therefore there's lower level of flexibility in terms of what they're going to put in. Therefore, it can be, because you can't sort of structure the procurement in such a way as to encourage engagement or discussion or solution design innovation. It can be harder to actually get that innovation as an outcome from it in terms of what the suppliers are then submitting. You're kind of potentially a little bit handcuffed with it, so it's not necessarily going to be suitable, appropriate when you know that you would benefit from some forms of engagement with the suppliers as part of having them arrive at final solution delivery or final solution proposals. Okay. The other thing from an administrative point of view that's difficult with it potentially is you can't limit the number of suppliers who can apply within an open procedure. So everyone who puts in a compliant submission, remember, because they're putting in the selection stage and the tender stage at the same time, everyone who is compliant at the selection stage, you are obligated to evaluate their tender stage of response. So you can sometimes inadvertently end up with an awful lot of responses to try and evaluate, which can be quite an administrative or time burden for for sort of hard-pressed procurement teams. So there are some cons with it as well. In terms of competitive flexible procedure, what are the pros and cons around these? What are the things we need to be thinking about, be aware of? Competitive flexible procedures, they do, as the name's not made up, guys. There's some truth in the name. So it does allow for that flexibility of design. The idea being that you can do things like build in engagement with suppliers with the idea that that engagement, for reasons that you've got good reason to suspect are true, you think will lead to better outcomes. Okay, you can design, as buying authorities can design the process to allow for the possibility of more innovation, and we'll talk about that within some of the particular tools within the tool set that they're allowed to, stages that they can apply within a competitive flexible procedure. From an administrative point of view, what you can potentially do is you are allowed to shortlist suitable suppliers. So I said in the open one, you're doing that supplier stage and you're doing the tender stage, you're submitting those simultaneous. In a competitive flexible procedure, you would have the option to say, do a shortlisting exercise, effectively a selection stage, and then only carry forward ones that meet a criteria, or you can use that as a shortlisting piece. So if you were suspecting, based on previous exercises, that if you have an open procedure for particular goods or services, that you're going to get 50 or 100 suppliers that are going to put in compliant responses, you potentially do not want to have the administrative burden of looking through those. So you could instead do a selection stage to try and shortlist those to reduce that, and you only maybe then, as an example, maybe you only take 5 suppliers through to tender stage. So I've seen that exact scenario happen, and authorities, obviously, if you've gone through the pain of doing that once, you don't want to potentially have 100 submissions to respond to. Okay, the other potential pro you have around competitive flexible procedure is with some restrictions, with some caveats. It does allow you to potentially make adjustments to the procedure as it is progressing, like as you are in it. You have to be really clear on what flexibility you want you to allow yourself to make adjustments has to be clear at the start of the process. Okay, so you can't just do everything, and you have to see what potential adjustments you would be looking to make or potentially look to make during the process. In terms of some of the cons around competitive flexible procedures, we can look at this through the lens of the supplier. You might look at it and go, this looks so multi-stage, this looks so complicated. The burden on me as a supplier, maybe as a smaller supplier, the burden on me to go through this process as it's been laid out, all these different stages, is so time consuming. I know I'm not going to have the resource capability to do this at all these different points. So actually I might make a decision to not participate, which would be sad. So the more complicated it is, the more likely you are to discourage, and probably disproportionately discourage, SMEs from participation. So which would lead to less competition, potentially like a less optimized solution that the buyer ends up finally choosing. From a buyer side, obviously they take more time and more effort to create and run. You don't really need to think radically about if it's an open procedure, but if you're going to design a multi-stage procedure, really you want to do it properly, you need to think about what stages you're going to use, how many, why you're using them, always linking back to the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So to do that properly, to do that proficiently, takes time and effort. And again, there's going to be a higher administrative burden of going through the stages of it. So it's going to take more effort to run as well. So this administrative burden is there. Complexity can be difficult as well, time consuming to manage too. So there's a little bit of a thinking about it. One of the points of comparison, just to put this into context, folks, that I think is worth mentioning. If we think about it in terms of a bid response, you've got to think about for any given bid response, well, what's appropriate in terms of the amount of time that I can afford or I can commit to putting this response together, okay? And the decision on that might be about how strategically important it is, the opportunity to capture. It might be, at least as likely to be about, well, how big a value opportunity is this? If it's a very big value opportunity, I can reasonably justify spending more time in putting my response together to submit. So if we flip that, or if we take that same kind of logic and apply that to buyer side, then they do need to think about, well, that sort of proportionality piece again, and really, is this the best use of the time given the strategic importance and given the contract value of this opportunity? So they're thinking, albeit from the other side, but they should be thinking along the sort of same lines for that type of decision making. Okay. Let's have a spin on to some opportunities that these this can kind of present to you, and see what we can potentially do. I've not got my my mouse work today has been shocking, folks. Absolutely shocking. Skipping over the slides all over the place. Okay. So, the point of the webinar was really to think about, to get us to a place where we could meaningfully discuss this type of stuff. Okay. So let's think about strategic considerations. Whenever I do webinars on bidding, I'm always banging on in one form or another about strategic considerations, about strategy, about understanding the context within which things are taking place, about understanding how decisions are building up upon each other, etc., etc. Just as a general point, one of the things that we really must do when we're thinking about tender, we don't want to think about tender responses as a writing exercise, okay? It's not what it's about. It's a thinking exercise with some writing built into it, okay? We need to be strategic all the way through. And I've got a whole backlog. I've been doing this for ages, 6 years worth of webinars talking about different aspects of strategy, different parts of the bidding process. Okay, but in terms of some specific strategic considerations that are going to be relevant based on the procedure type that they're running, let's have a think about them. The first, when I'm just talking about this, in terms of just how important this is, the type of procedure and how that's been laid out, there will be occasions where if it's one versus another, that would be enough to influence the decision as to whether or not you pursue that tender. Okay, it can have a significant and material impact on the likelihood of you being successful by the end of it. Therefore, if we're being strategic, it should have a potential bearing on whether we actually choose to pursue that opportunity in the first place. So hopefully you can have a think about that, let that type of bit sink in, but it can be that important, folks. So that's why I'm saying it in these type of terms. So it really is important that we understand what the implications of it is for us as a potential winning supplier. Okay. So within the context of an open procedure, what are the strategic considerations, the things that we need to be aware of? It's really important within every context, but specifically within an open one, we need to think about how much we know about your competitors, okay? So are we in a good position? If we think about this as a kind of open procedures, once they start, like, it's kind of a fixed piece, right? We're not going to get a chance to influence anything with the buyer. We're not going to be able to engage with them and understand and kind of do this dance around trying to work out what they're really looking for. We just have to go off the bat as to what they're looking for based on what it says in the documentation and any other information we've gleaned about them before that, or any research type pieces that we've done during the course. With that in mind, how are we going to determine whether or not we should pursue and how we should pursue? Well, it's based on where are we versus where our competitors are against the specification as it's been documented within that standard, within that opportunity, within the documents for that opportunity. So what do we know about our competitors? Have we got a limited number of competitors that we have good information on? Do we have hundreds of potential competitors, a very fragmented market that we know very little about? If it's the latter case, we need to start thinking about putting our competitors into buckets and putting ourselves, which sort of bucket or segment of competitor which type of competitor are we? Which type do we think are best suited for the delivery of the tender as it's been laid out, as it's got this mapped out specification from the buyer? So what do we know about that? That's really important to do that kind of analysis to then understand how viable is this as an opportunity. What strategically, what do we look at? So are we an organization who thrives in terms of the innovation that we can provide around about our solution design and about an influence and a collaborative approach with our potential buyers to arrive at a best fit solution? If that's what we do in each and every occasion, how fit for purpose is an open procedure where you're going to have no ability to contact and to have that sort of influence? Okay, so that's a scenario where actually it could potentially have an impact on whether we choose to pursue. And obviously, we'll talk about it in a second, but the flip's true as well. Open procedure, we have a need to be really focused on, do we meet the specifications, the requirements in full? We need to be dialed on in terms of that focus on our compliance to have a best chance of doing that. Do we have lots of gaps against the specification? Well, if we have no ability to influence and to inform the buyer about alternatives that we can use, then how fit for purpose is this as an opportunity for us to pursue? So to give you an example, I reviewed a tender from someone after they'd submitted it and they weren't successful. And it was where there was a particular building material that was required to be used. I think if I remember correctly, I think it was a specific type of wood that had to be used. And this particular supplier had put in their response and they'd said, well, no, you don't want to use that wood. This is the alternative type of wood because of this, and this properties of it. It's actually better as an all-rounder and I can do it for cheaper. Therefore, I'm putting this in the submission. But the specifications are actually one of the quality questions was very specific about saying you need to talk about your supply and how you will use this type of wood and price for it. And this person said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm doing my own way. So it got a 0 mark against that particular answer. And there was a threshold where you had to reach a particular mark across all of the quality questions or yours was disqualified. So he was disqualified for that. So in a different context, that might have been having that conversation and talking about an alternative material or something like that would have been very useful. If there was a piece around dialogue, they could have potentially brought that in and looked to have that conversation. But within the confines of an open procedure where we talked about handcuffing, then really that was always going to be the case. So if you're sat there, maybe in a more kind of complex scenario, if you're sat there as a supplier, but you don't have the ability to put something in that you want to, and you can't meet those specifications, then you have to think, well, actually, is this the right opportunity for us given that procedure? Just a little bit on competitive flexible procedures. Want to just mention, we need to think about what it is that they're looking to achieve with the particular design of competitive flexible procedure that they've chosen. How does the approach that they've taken support the outcomes that they're looking to achieve? Why have they chosen to use the approach they've taken? What approach should we have to then align to that? Are they using a competitive flexible procedure because they want to build in, are they using it purely to reduce their administrative burden by shortlisting suppliers? Are they using it because they're building in loads of stages because they're actually looking for a high degree of reassurance as to the quality and reliability of the solution that they finally arrive at? Are they using certain aspects of dialogue or negotiation because there are maybe gaps, maybe the tender documents infer this as well, that there's gaps in exactly their understanding of what the best solution might be? Well, that last one feels a lot more like an innovative type scenario, whereas the middle one I referenced, maybe they're just looking for a raft of reassurance about the continual quality and service delivery, but not necessarily innovation, or the front one where they're just looking for really, really clear on what they're looking for, but they're just looking to the administrative burden of getting through it. all these type of things. So let's be really clear on what goals they're looking at. They've designed the process to support, and then that should actually feed into what are the themes that we want to be emphasizing, our kind of win strategy. What are the themes we want to be emphasizing across our submission to align with the overall goals that they need to meet, that are supported by the process that they've choose to take. So getting into kind of like a little bit kind of complex thinking with this, but this is the type of thinking that you do want to consider for this, for when you're thinking about why have they chosen to make this and what should I be doing to respond to it. Okay. So how innovative is you as a supplier? Are you? Are you very much like we have our offering? It's great when it's in a kind of fixed context of an open procedure, or we're really innovative and actually the more flexibility we've got around talking about that, the more we can engage with them, talk with them, the better our chances are. It might be the difference between applying for it or not. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about some of the specific items from the toolkit that buyers can use and design as part of their as a step within a competitive flexible procedure. So variant tenders are one. We talked a lot about, there was that piece around they're trying to encourage innovation. So I think it's something we might see more of. We certainly should see more of. We are allowed to submit variant tenders. Just for clarity, what is a variant tender? Variant tenders are alternative proposals submitted by suppliers in response to a procurement process. This is a quote, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed. Instead of strictly following the buyer's specifications, a variant tender offers a different approach that may provide better value, efficiency, or innovation. So it's saying they want alternative solutions. It's really saying we're not 100% convinced that what we've put out will deliver the absolute best outcomes we have in terms of the procurement exercise. So what we want to do is offer alternative solutions to do things like potentially encourage innovation, to increase efficiency, to increase the value that the procurement delivers, to deliver cost savings across directly or indirectly across the organization, etc. Okay. The opportunities for you are, well, you get an extra swing at the pitch or extra swings at the pitch. You can submit it alongside your standard bid. But the opportunities, as with all this type of stuff, are we need to think about be strategic about it. So what I mean by that is, well, how much deviation from the standard bid is going to be appropriate? How big the gap do you think what they've got is between what they know they need and a little bit of something else? Is it like they really don't seem that clear and there's a real opportunity for doing something very innovative and radical? Or is it just that they're looking for potentially some tweaks around the edges of what they've laid out? So how much adjustment is going to be appropriate? Don't just kind of finger in the air. You need to have a strategic reasoning behind why we've chosen to go with a variant that looks like this, this, or this. Part of that discussion or that consideration within your organization should be about what's the competition going to be doing. Do we know they've got more radical solutions, or do we need to be the one that sort of stands out and take more of a sort of risk approach, a really high risk approach for some of our variants? Is that more likely to work? Is it very likely that our standard bid is going to be unsuccessful and it's worth taking that bigger risk on it, etc.? Okay. Talked about this at various stages across various webinars, but in terms of what does the winning bid most often do? And I'm paraphrasing from some stuff from best practice from APMP. The winning bid is the one that has the biggest gap between the price and the value, the meaningful value that it delivers to the buyer. So how can you use a variant bid? What can you put into your variant bid to increase that gap as much as possible? Bear in mind with it, we need to make sure that we meet minimum requirements with variant tenders. Okay, so do make sure that that's always the case. And just some other tips and things that we need to be thinking about is we want to make it really easy for them to compare the variant against the standard, so they could do a kind of side-by-side comparison. So even if it is quite fundamentally different, a solution, how can you structure your response to make it look so you can say, okay, I can make something of a direct comparison. It's difficult for them to compare apples to oranges, okay? So do include that. If you're doing something that's innovative, that's new, provide that reassurance about what impact it's going to have, provide the reassurance, the evidence that it's technically feasible within the context that it's going to be used. Outline your sort of mitigation strategies for any type of risks, etc., etc. So some really good opportunity. Again, think strategically, think through what you need to do, how best to do it to make it the most compelling case possible. Okay, just spin through a little bit more in terms of when there's a dialogue phase going to be used within the competitive flexible procedure. Well, just for clarity, why do they do this a type of dialogue phase? Well, it's so that they've got the opportunity to engage with suppliers and actually to try and refine any requirements upon which they might not be completely clear. Okay. It's more likely that you're going to use this where they feel there's an opportunity for either innovation or for flexibility to help them reach better procurement outcomes than if they'd been more prescriptive about what they want and what you must do, what you must include within your submission. It's into that realm where there's going to be more complexity. So again, the government quote, where needs cannot be met without adaptation of readily available solutions. So if they've done, for example, some market engagement, and they've determined that actually there isn't an off-the-shelf solution for exactly what we need, then they might go down this route of having a process with stages of dialogue built into it. The other point relevant to that, again, I'm quoting, where the contract cannot be awarded without prior negotiation because of the nature of the requirement, the complexity of its legal and financial makeup, or because of its risks. So again, reasons around the realms of complexity, uncertainty, etc., where they know they're going to need to engage. So again, well thought out procurements, we want to achieve these outcomes. Actually, there's a little bit of a grey area that we've got in terms of the process to do that. We need to use the process to kind of flesh some of that stuff out to make sure we reach all of those outcomes that we're looking for. Okay, so in terms of opportunities, and a lot of this stuff comes back to just good fundamental bid strategy that we need to be considering, but what else can we do? If they're going to be procuring something with complex requirements, typically that will mean it'll take longer to research, to design what the procurement exercise is going to look like. They're going to potentially look for some market engagement upfront as well, even if they don't have a formal event or something like that around pre-engagement. If you know that an authority is potentially looking to procure, you've got that kind of pipeline visibility, something that's going to be complex, there should be a longer lead time and more opportunity to try and engage with them before the actual tender gets released. Again, thinking strategically, why is it being used? Is it because they are looking for innovation, or is it because is it to do with more like legal complexity or terms and conditions complexity, contract complexity that they're looking, they need to kind of iron that out relating to risk or something like that. So really, like, let's be clear and like work out what it is they're looking for and then shape our answers accordingly, shape our approach accordingly. Okay. And again, it's really, really important that all the way through we're kind of re-emphasizing the value of our offering and that delta between price and the value that we'll deliver. Okay. Within this context, again, depends on what they're looking for within the dialogue, but there might be more opportunity to have some more flexible or more complex pricing models that might be appropriate within a context for of a commercial dialogue process with a commercial dialogue in a stage, and you can explore that. So if you've got some ideas around what might be appropriate, then you might have some opportunities to look at that as well as part of the process. But go into that prepared, go into that ready to say, okay, well, actually, we've got some different options here. How might they be appropriate? Okay. And the last sort of stage that's important to think about there's an example that we'll talk through just about presentations, and I think this is going to be one of the more common ones. I would expect to see this even without very large scale contract values, then we will still see authorities looking to invite you to a presentation stage. So again, with everything else, really it's that preparation, it's about strategic thinking, it's about understanding sensitivity, all that type of stuff is what's going to really elevate you in terms of the success you're going to have within presentations. Just for clarity, why are they being used? Well, again, quoting, aimed at confirming that the proposals being made are deliverable. Okay. So it's about not doing something completely left field. It's about the reason they're putting them in. It's like, let's just check. It's a bit of a sense check. Okay. So making sure that they're going to achieve the best procurement outcomes. Again, that sort of check to make sure. Clarifying any uncertainty about the written content to make sure that we're absolutely clear that we understand it, and we're clear in terms of making sure that we're comfortable with the level of risk that's involved. And obviously they might want to say, I want to see some demonstration, I want to see some things demonstrated, I want you to help them bring it to life. In terms of the opportunities that presentations present, they present great opportunities if you think strategically about it. You can use them to reinforce the win themes. What are the themes that you think are important, that are going to win you the work, that are going to resonate with the authority, that align with the objectives they've set out for the procurement and align with their wider organizational objectives. So you can be referencing your win themes across the presentation. It's a bit of a, it's a more open format. So you've got that opportunity to put those win themes across, to really tell the story that you want to. Okay, so you should use it to bring it to life, to actually make it like a story that you're telling. Okay, so lots and lots of value that you can demonstrate across your presentation. So it really is worth putting a good amount of effort into to make sure that you're really emphasizing all of this good stuff, and be as creative as you can be in terms of what's really going to resonate. How do we do demonstrations of what our offering looks like? What's the best way? Is that, are we walking them through things on the screen? Are we going to have some videos? Are we going to see things, actually real life scenarios running through, etc. Another bit of advice, another opportunity that presentations give you is the opportunity to be very well prepared in terms of the different types of questions and different scenarios they might ask you about during the presentation. They usually will have a Q&A section. Have you done some scenario role play within your team? Have you thought about the different aspects, the different ideas that they might take? Okay, it's really important to utilize these stages. Think of them as opportunities. Where can I run through this stage better than potentially my competitors can? If I do that, I'm going to be in great situation. So hopefully that helps in terms of we've built up a bit of a picture in terms of there's a framework, there's a legislation, there's guidance from the government that authorities are supposed to consider. They've got outcomes that they're looking to achieve, this underlying principles. Then there's the outcomes they're looking to achieve with the procurement. They're choosing a procurement route to achieve those outcomes. How do we tap into that, understand where it all fits together and how we should respond to those, etc., etc. So really, really good stuff to think about and to carry on. Okay, just I'm conscious that I rehearsed this and I was a little bit quicker, but one or two last little bits just to spin through. There were some hot topics and some frequently asked questions. A lot of questions were asked. Obviously, it's a big audience on the webinar today and that had registered. So just a couple of things to pick up and share with you. This is broadening the topic out a little bit, but because there were so many questions about it, I just wanted to cover it off for you guys. In terms of when are we seeing these impacts take place, the stuff you've talked about, the procedural changes, all this type of stuff's happening now. It's happening since the 24th of Feb. It's all live, it's all going. One of the things that was coming up around that was obviously a bit different procedural types. So you're going to see things like open frameworks, which are new, dynamic markets, which are new, competitive, flexible procedures, let me put my teeth in, which we've talked about at length across this webinar. So these are all things that are live. You're going to see opportunities with these in it from continuing into the future. Okay, central digital platform, just to touch on it, lots of questions around it. Obviously, that was implemented and went live with the Procurement Act. The central digital platform is the central piece where you have you get a unique identifier for your organization, and you answer the headline administrative questions from a selection questionnaire. The idea is there's one version of you as a company that every authority can make sure they understand who you are. And that information that you've put into the central digital platform will be pulled by a couple of different mechanisms into whichever portal you're responding to your opportunity within. The central digital platform is not going to be where procurements are going to be run through, just for clarity, okay? You're never going to have a procurement, a tender opportunity that you can respond to solely within the central digital platform. You will always be referred to a different portal to complete the tender submission. Okay. In terms of actions, obviously there's a lot of language that's new, there's procedure types that's new. One of the things is I've come across lots of people contacting me saying, I'm not quite sure about this, I don't understand how it works. Each standalone set of tender documents should give you the information you need without having a lot of the other context to be able to compliantly respond to that opportunity. It will explain to you the process and the obligations that are placed upon you if you want to put in a compliant response. If you read one of them and you don't understand, there's gaps in your understanding as to what you have to do, my first port of call would be to ask a colleague to review it with you. If they've come up with a different or they have the same concern, then you can then clarify that with the authority, because it could be that there's some mistakes in them. So I've seen, just a really simple example, I've seen a submission that I was helping a client with, and it talks about you had to put in standard and discounted prices, but it didn't talk anywhere about where standard versus discounted prices would apply, what quantities, etc. It just said you have to put in standard and discounted prices, and those were kind of averaged out for your pricing submission, but didn't tell you where they would be used. So that's just a mistake, because there's no way you could put in maybe one really high and one really low, depending on which ones was going to be actually used. So without it being clear, it's just an oversight on the authority's part. Okay, so there will be mistakes, especially with some of the more complicated ones potentially. If you don't understand it, you've checked it, ask the question, ask them to clarify. Pre-engagement, there are loads of questions about pre-engagement, really, really important. Pre-engagement, there are new notice types, pipeline notices, preliminary market engagement notices, and planned procurement notices, which replace prior information notices, which were pins. Look out for these. If you see them, start engaging with them. Look to see if it's something, if it's a market engagement piece that you can go to and engage with the buyer. If not, use it to support your planning activities. Understand what opportunities are going to be coming out and make a point to engage with. Okay, the last piece just to touch on, AI and bidding, folks. Lots of chat about AI and bidding. Lots of impact on, in terms of how it impacts on responses. Obviously, there's lots of ways in which AI can be used at various points along the process, some more successfully at different points in the process than others. Everyone thinks of AI as bid writing. There are loads of different applications for AI across the bid process, so it is worth considering. As an organization, do we use AI as part of our bid process? Should we? Can we gain some efficiency? Can we improve the quality of our submissions? What you should not do with AI is point it at the internet and say, write the answer to this question. It will be garbage. It won't be garbage, it will be mediocre at best, and it quite possibly will be a misrepresentation of how, as an organization, you'd actually do something. Don't do that, guys. Do not do that and then submit it. I've seen bids where that's what people have done. It's a terrible idea. The very least you'll get is a mediocre mark. And you might get disqualified outright. So don't do that. The fundamental is whatever you put into a final submission you should be 100% clear on that is a true representation of your organization's ability and what you propose to do to deliver the requirements for the buyer. Okay, so do not put unfettered, unchecked AI content. It's fine to use it as a support for some of the drafting. It's fine to do it to extract information, to look at different criteria, to summarize research, all that type of stuff. But let's be really a bit smarter. The concern for buyers is around about hallucinations, which is basically saying things that aren't true. But there's a bigger piece. If you're putting things in final submissions that are not true, then there's a whole raft of things you need to do. So if you're using AI responsibly, don't worry about the questions they're asking. If you've used it, you won't be penalized for doing it. Just as long as you're using it responsibly, you can respond to those questions honestly about AI. Guys, I'm conscious of time. That's the end of what we wanted to get to. I did actually have a live question I was going to pick up on, but we've run out of time. Thank you for sticking with me. My 45 minutes has turned into an hour. Nearly everyone stayed with, so thank you very much. There must have been some value there for you. Guys, if you want to carry on the conversation, drop us a note at bidsupport@tendersdirect.com. And we'll pick that up and we can carry on a conversation about any aspect you want to talk about, procedures, anything like that at all. I'm very happy to have the conversation. If there's something that's bothering you or you want a little bit more support, you've got some particular issues, again, do the same thing, just reach out and get in contact. If you're not sure that you're seeing full market coverage of every single opportunity that's going to be relevant for you within the public sector, get in touch with us or go onto our website. You can get a demonstration of how Tenders Direct will find and categorize all those opportunities for you. And there's also access for a demonstration and for a free trial as well with no obligation. So if you're not sure you're getting all of the tenders landing with you that you should, get in touch with us either through our website or through the contact there. We will show you what the whole of market really looks like. And you can make sure that you're pursuing the best opportunities. Likewise, if you need any support with any of your bidding activities, I'm very happy to discuss that. We do a lot of one-to-one work, with clients to support them and make sure they're as successful as possible. On that note, on 2 minutes over the whole allocated hour when I said 45 minutes, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I really hope that everyone's taken some good value from the session. Thank you very, very much for sticking with me. All the best for the rest of the Wednesday afternoon and all the best for the rest of the week. And here's to a long and sunny summer for all those in the UK. So thank you very much, folks. And we'll see you at the next webinar next month. Thanks again.